Welcome back, everyone, to episode number 43 of the Beginner to Master Speedrun. I am coming into today rated 1661 on a win streak of 134 games. So let's try and keep it going. I'll hop into the first game. Okay, first opponent, playing Umut Balkan, rated 1566. And I'm sticking with the usual, facing Roy Lopez, so not seeing an Italian. I'll play the usual pawn a6, and we have an exchange variation, which maybe I've encountered a few times so far this speedrun. Of course, knight takes e5 instead of h3 would be a mistake because queen d4, a very typical type of trap. h3 is not the most common move, but it is stopping bishop to g4. So I guess here I have to figure out how I want to develop. Leaning towards knight f6, very simply attacking the pawn. And yeah, I think that's the most natural square for the knight. Imagine white will play d3 or knight c3. Knight c3. So, and of course this pawn is still undefended, but I'm pretty sure I can still make it, so it's not good for white to take. The move I'm looking at here is bishop to c5, where if takes, then queen d4 would attack the knight and the pawn. So I'll go for bishop c5, trying to develop actively. White castles. So now it's probably time to defend the pawn. Queen e7, first move that comes to mind. Yeah, I really don't see anything wrong with this. I think I'll have the choice pretty soon whether to castle kingside or queenside. But white's striking in the center. Okay, pawn d4. So I think I have to take. I mean, bishop d6 would defend, but then I'm losing a lot of time. Takes. I also don't want to trade off my bishop. Like, one of the drawbacks of this opening for white is it gives back the bishop pair. So I would like to keep the bishops long term. I think I'll just castle kingside here. Yeah, just get the king away from the center. And one of the plans is to use the open d-file. If I can play rook d8 next move and pin the knight to the queen, that would be really nice. I should also note that the pawn was probably not takeable in the previous position, because after takes, rook e1 would pin my queen and king on that file. White playing ambitiously. Okay, knight to f5, so attacking my queen. Of course, I could take the knight, which I think I'm leaning towards. It doesn't feel so safe to leave the knight here. There's not too many attractive squares with my queen. If I take the knight, then takes, white's going to have this pawn on f5. I can probably get the rooks into play. Yeah, let's go for this. And rook a d8, I think, is the most natural move. There's also queen e5 to immediately attack the pawn. I should anticipate what white's going to do. I think either queen e5 or rook a d8 is met with queen f3, supporting the pawn. So I'm trying to imagine just the next few moves. Like rook a d8, queen f3. What's my eventual plan in the position? I would really like to attack the pawn multiple times. And maybe there's an idea to, after queen f3, play bishop d4. Maybe just take the knight and damage white's structure. Also kind of have to anticipate bishop to g5 in certain positions. If I put my rook here, then I'm asking to eventually get pinned. So queen e5, queen f3, bishop d4. Maybe that's the way to go. Queen e5, immediately centralize. Queen f3, bishop d4. I create the battery. Queen and bishop line up to attack the knight. And then later I can probably focus on bringing the rooks in. Yeah, it's a close call. I mean, rook a d8 was probably completely fine. But I think this move applies a bit more pressure as we go into the middle game. Like, one eventual plan is to take on c3, damage white's structure, and then use my knight, basically centralize it and attack white's queenside. Try and exploit white's eventually weak pawns. Okay, so bishop d4. Though I'm realizing bishop d4, bishop f4, but then I can take on f5. So it should be fine. White does play bishop f4. And if I take on f5, this could lead to a lot of trades, because there's takes, takes, takes. But it's a situation, like if we trade pretty much everything, like queens and bishop for knight, a couple pawns, white's going to be left with pretty horrendous pawn structure. If white doesn't take here, then I'll just be up a pawn. Yeah, so the calculation is takes, and then takes, and then takes, and then takes, and then takes. And white will have two sets of double isolated pawns. Basically, all of white's pawns would be isolated. There'd be knight d5 in the end to attack the bishop and the c3 pawn. So we'll see if white wants to go into that. It looks like white does. Okay. I mean, I could take on c2, which maybe just more directly wins a pawn, but I think it's more worth just destroying white's structure. And this is one of the ugliest structures you can get in a game of chess. All the pawns are weak, but it's still equal material, so this still takes some work to convert the positional advantage into a winning advantage. I'm going to start with knight to d5. It's a tempo move. And this doesn't win the pawn right away, because white does have bishop e5. Bishop a5 probably runs into b6. I'm not sure about that line, b6, c4. White goes for bishop e5. And now, yeah, f6 looks pretty natural. Kick the bishop. Get ready to bring my king into the game. A very positional game so far. Like, there was a sequence of trades which maybe was a little bit tactical, but now it's purely positional. It's really about optimizing my pieces, trying to exploit white's weaknesses. Knight f4 looks attractive, attacking the pawn. Yeah, because the knight's not really doing much on d5. It's nice to improve the knight with an attack. Also knight e2 in the air. And white has king h2 or h4 to save the pawn. And it's still a matter of getting my rooks into play. Probably rook e8. Yeah, I mean, the two center files are fully open. The only files with no pawns on them. Now rook e2 is an idea. I do have to watch my time, but there's still plenty of time left for this endgame. We might see rook b1 attacking the pawn. Rook b1, maybe b5 is a nice way to make sure there's no problems on the b file. In this structure, it looks like the b pawn is backwards, but if it can easily move forward, then it's not truly a backwards pawn. If white had a pawn on a5, then it would be perhaps a long-term weakness. I don't think I'll allow that to happen. Okay, king g3. So this does give me the chance to play this and then take and trade off the minor pieces. I would maybe help white improve the structure. So I guess it's a question like what else to do with the knight. I could move back to d5, g5. G5 is actually interesting because looks like I blunder the pawn, but I have the fork. G5 does reinforce a knight. If h4, then maybe I can play knight e2. Yeah, I'm gonna play g5. I mean, it's a positional move to essentially get the outpost on f4, but it sets up the tactical trap. I can say, oh no, my pawn. But yeah, oh no, white's bishop. It can be very easy to miss this sort of backwards knight fork. So even in very positional games, tactics are still present. Now white's king is very active. Let's save the knight. Maybe there's some mating potential with the king on g5. I'm fantasizing about rook g8, king f4, rook a to e8, cutting the king off on both files. Okay, white plays rook b1, so attacking the pawn. Yeah, let's just play b5. c4. Okay, so now I'm trying to conceptualize a checkmating idea. I mean, rook g8, king f4, rook a e8, setting up knight h5, king f5. Feels very close. And let's start with this. If the king moves this way, then I was going to say it should be easier. King moves to f5. Yeah, I'm going to still play this move. Not a configuration you see every day. Like some very pleasing symmetry with this setup. Okay, let's take, I guess, towards the center. I do see one mating idea. I could play the move h6, and this would threaten mate in 2 with rook g5, king f4, and then either knight d5 or knight h5 checkmate. Maybe I could have played h6 the previous move, like bait white into taking one of my pawns and then go for the mate. Yeah, d7 is covered by the knight, so we'll try and set this up. Okay, and this is mate in 2. Knight h5 will be mate next move. So pretty efficient way to get the job done there. I mean, sometimes in these endings you have to be very patient and clean up the pawns and eventually make a queen. But in this case, we saw the very quick mating attack. And I think overall this was a pretty instructive game. I mean, solid play from the opening from both sides. And I guess white maybe went a little bit wrong playing this move, knight f5, because it left white with the weakness on f5 and also led to me having a lot of improving moves with tempo. And it's not the easiest position for white to kind of keep controlled. Engine says the best move is rook to b1, which is pretty hard to find here. The second best move is g4, which looks weakening, but maybe it's worth just supporting the f5 pawn, then preparing bishop f4. Yeah, this actually makes a lot of sense if white can play this move next. Make sure the king side is not too weak. But yeah, once we got this ending, and life was pretty good for black. So yeah, hopefully some lessons for the viewers to take away. Let's move on to the next game. Okay, next opponent playing Mayan Yunt, 1969. Play e4. I'm feeling the urge to play a Spanish. Like basically what my opponent just played. I was going to say that if black plays a6, I would go to the exchange variation, try and show a better way to play it. But with d6, there's not really a reason to take the knight right away. The bishop's not attacked, and I'm pinning the knight. So I think in this case, I'll just castle and, yeah, probably look to play d4 at some point. Okay, bishop g4. Maybe this is a drawback of not playing h3. I have walked into a small pin. I think h3 makes a lot of sense, just to question the bishop. If the bishop moves back, then it has a harder time moving back into the center later in the game. But this pin it's a little bit annoying because, I mean, d4 isn't as effective with my knight not really supporting the pawn. So I think the plan is just to keep developing. I think I'll probably play in a slower manner, like d3, bishop e3, knight d2, maybe gradually prepare the eventual pawn d4 later in the middle game. Okay, bishop e7. Yeah, bishop e3. I don't want to take too long for natural developing moves. Now knight d2. So this is a pretty harmonious setup. Like all the minor pieces are serving a role in the position. And even though this knight is still pinned, it's not really causing too much pain. And there's a few plans going forward. One plan is to do the Spanish knight walk. Very often you see the knight going to f1 and eventually to g3. Now, one thing I'm kind of wondering about is if black wants to play this move next, attacking the bishop and trying to exploit the knight. And there's takes and takes. But I think I'll throw in c3. This is a very flexible move, not only preventing knight d4, but there's cases where black expands on the queen side and the bishop will eventually retreat to c2, and then later prepare pawn d4. So it's one of these Spanish lines which I don't think is too theoretical. Like, I'll admit that I was pretty much out of any opening prep after d6 on move 3. It's not a line I really remember studying much. But we're getting a lot of like common themes in the Spanish where you play c3, you eventually prepare pawn d4, and it's very slow, kind of steady play from white. Black takes on f3. So this is usually a welcome sight. I could take with the knight or the queen. Leaning a little bit towards queen takes. Because I still kind of want the knight to come to g3, and then eventually to f5. And the queen is nicely active on f3, not easy for black to attack. Some cases the queen slides over and white plays f4. Yeah, generally it's not great for the bishop to take the knight that's pinned. Even though it's not a huge mistake, it just leads to a slightly more pleasant position for white. And I'm really just going for this this knight maneuver. It seems like black is maybe going for pawn f5, maybe also putting a minor piece on g5. I don't think f5 is really a threat because I can take it. So I'll continue with my plan. Okay, bishop g5. Very reasonable move. I mean, black is trying to trade off what was in a pretty passive bishop for my more active bishop. And I don't think I can avoid the trade, so I'll just carry through with my original plan, getting the knight to a happy place. Now I do have a choice here, queen takes, pawn takes, or rook takes. Queen takes feels the most natural. The pawn takes opens the f-file. Also gives me a third center pawn. imbalances things a little bit. Yeah, I think this is more of a judgment call. I'm going to take with the pawn. It's not a thing that I can like easily calculate. It's not really a forcing move. But I think the benefit of having the half-open f-file, the pawn controlling some more center squares, like black doesn't really have the idea of bringing the knight to f4, but does have the idea of bringing the knight to e7. So leaving my bishop in no man's land. Yeah, let's just drop it back. Aligning with the king, and discouraging pawn d5. It's possible we can see c6 and d5. Or king h8, okay, so unpinning the f-pawn. I'll play rook f1. Yeah, the rook is much happier back on f1. I didn't want to take on f7. That would walk into knight g5. Knight g5 played. Yeah, I'm thinking queen g4 here. A nice kind of active square. Not easy for black to attack the queen here. Also supports pawn h5. Maybe can lead to some eventual attack against g7. And I'm probably threatening to play pawn h4 to win the f-pawn. Because there's two defenders and two attackers currently. I'm just looking at this move pawn d5, which is now maybe possible because my queen is no longer helping control the d5 square. Calculating pawn d5 takes and takes. And pawn e4 would walk into a triple fork, attacking the queen, rook, and bishop. So yeah, this would be interesting if black goes for this move. Instead, queen c8. So it seems like black is just trying to simplify a bit, relieve the pressure. So if I take, and then let's say rook takes, and then h4. Yeah, I might be winning a pawn, because knight e6. There's actually a really cool tactic to take on f7 with a rook, and then takes, and I'm forking the rooks in the end with my bishop. One more time, takes. If knight takes h4, then the rooks are disconnected. I would just take on e6. If knight ever moves back to h7, I just win the f7 pawn. So queen takes c8 looks pretty clean. Yeah, let's go for it. h4. Yeah, at first it looks like black is defending everything. I should just double check to make sure the tactics are working here. So I'm sacrificing a whole rook, but then I win back the knight, and then I'll win back bishop for rook. So yeah, this should just win a pawn. A nice little tactical combination. Just taking advantage of the instability in black's position. And it's definitely by no means over. Like, it's really just beginning the battle in the endgame. An extra pawn that I have is basically the doubled pawn on the e-file. Let's take the rook. And yeah, I might as well trade the rooks. Generally, when you're up a pawn in the endgame, it's good to simplify. And unlike the previous game, I don't think I'll be getting a mating attack anytime soon in this endgame. So let's try and make steady improvements. Start by bringing my king to the center. Probably look to play pawn d4 very soon. Also try and find a better square for my knight. Yeah, where does my knight want to go, actually? Can start with knight f1. Probably make way for the g-pawn. It's not the easiest position to win. Definitely want to manage my time, too. Because at some point, like probably later on, there will be some critical moment to calculate. And at this stage, it's really about improving the king and knight, and then looking for the pawn break, and probably d4. Now with h5, almost certainly want my knight on f3, because the g5 square is a potential outpost. I assume that most people watching know what an outpost is, but if there's anyone that hasn't heard this term before, it's simply a square for a knight, which is supported by a pawn and can't be attacked by an opponent pawn, usually within the opponent's territory. So very often these squares are very strong in the middle game or end game for a knight. With pawn c5, black is maybe trying to discourage pawn d4. Oh, wow. So black's sacrificing a pawn to double basically double the c pawns. But I'm happy to take that, because now I have the d3 square for my king. And I know double pawns, they have a reputation of being very weak, but they're not really weak if they're easy to defend. They're also kind of hard for the opponent to attack. And I have the idea of probably playing c5 and trading c pawn for e pawn. I think black maybe should have maneuvered the knight to better square, and that's what they're going for now. So I could start with king d3. Yeah, preemptively defending the e4 pawn. And now, yeah, c5 is very tempting because it makes progress. It destabilizes black's... Oh, wait a minute. c5, d5? And then takes and then e4. Have to be a little bit careful. I mean, there's c5, d5, and then I take on e5. Yeah, maybe that's the way to go. Yeah, that should be fine. Okay, black abandoning the d-pawn. I don't think this move... I mean, it does set up knight f2, but once I take, I'm very close to queening. The king is within range. So let's play knight g5. This is a multi-purpose move, defending e4, so knight f2 doesn't win a pawn. Also prevents king e6. And I'm creating a barrier that the king can't cross. And now b4 looks pretty good. I mean, I have the pawn majority on the queen side. Looking to play c4 next. And c5 is coming. Okay, I think I've managed my time decently well. Still 2 minutes left. And I think at this point the position is very simple to play for white. Just want to push pawns. The king is boxed out. The knight is also not able to get back in time. So yeah, another instructive game. Very positional game. But we still saw that tactics can still be very relevant even in these positional battles. I think the opening, again, was very solid. Another Spanish. Hopefully some lessons to take away with this night walk maneuver. And then just being patient too, and waiting for the opportunity to pounce on the opponent. Like for the first chunk of the game, I was really just improving my pieces. And then eventually I had the tactic with takes and h4. And this was all pretty forcing. Yeah, and if knight h7, this also loses the pawn on f7. So, yeah, once I won the pawn, think everything was pretty smooth. I mean, it still takes a lot of patience. Also took some help from my opponent. C4 is probably not the best way to resist. Probably black should play knight f6 sooner, knight g8 and then knight f6 sooner. And yeah, I think I was going to play knight g5, let's say knight f6, and eventually go for d4 or maybe some queenside expansion. Engine is really liking knight e6 in this position. Ah, because king f7 I fork. And if king g8, knight d8. Yeah, my knight could maybe just invade. Pawn b6, knight c6, pawn a5. Yeah, the knight's kind of creepy crawly. And yeah, inducing some weaknesses in black structure. So yeah, none of that happened because after c4 I took, and yeah, pretty smooth game. So yeah, definitely some instructive positional battles today. Let's do one more. Approaching the 1700 rating. Playing Greek Patriots fan. This time we have a Queen's Pawn opening. Are we going to see a London, Queen's Gambit, a Catalan, Kali, a Torre? It's one of these positions. White does have a lot of options. It is usually a little bit unusual for the opponent to take this much time. Because yeah, I assume if my opponent is a regular d4 player, it's likely they've played this position before. Maybe it's possible there's a Patriots game going on right now, and my opponent's actually offering me a draw to wants to end the game. Yeah, I'm not going to take a draw. I have a pretty nice streak. Let's decline this. I do have chat turned off, so I don't know what the situation is for my opponent. Okay, bishop g5. This is an attempted torre. Generally, bishop g5, it's maybe considered a little bit dubious because the knight comes in with tempo. Bishop c1, so white wasted a couple moves. A little bit strange. I'm going to just develop, and I think now I can play essentially a reverse London. I'll play pawn e6. And it's a London where I've already improved my knight. White completely undeveloping. Okay. So probably not the most serious opening here. Still have to be careful. I mean, opponents rated like mid 1700s. Thinking bishop d6 is a natural developing move. There's a trap if f3 I have queen h4. Okay, pawn g3. So white's not allowing any immediate tactics. Yeah, I think I just want to play safe, castle, and not do anything too crazy here. And basically, I'm just trying to develop efficiently and then get to a point where I can open the center. F3, okay, so I don't think this is worth going for, which means, yeah, the only other logical move is knight f6. And I really don't mind the trade of bishops. Even though it would double my pawns, it would give me the half-open e-file. It would also trade off white's only developed piece. So knight c3. Our bishops are having a staring contest. And this is a case where I probably just want to open the center, like use some pawn breaks, maybe rook e8 and e5 eventually. I still don't mind the trade. White's playing g4. I mean, now I'm inclined to look at this sacrifice. Takes, and queen h4. King f1 and then takes, and then I don't think it's worth going for, though. It looks pretty. Queen e1 in the end. I would lose a piece, and I'm getting kind of unclear compensation. I could take now. Queen takes. I could also just go back. Yeah, probably going back is the simplest. Keeping the tension. Definitely want to keep in mind the prospect of bringing the queen to h4. And if white plays h4, I might have bishop g3. Okay, knight e2. I'm thinking pawn e5 here. Pawn e5. Because if takes takes, I'm hitting f3. Takes takes. The drawback is d5 could be undefended, but I don't think that's a big issue. Also have to keep in mind this move g5. I'm not entirely sure. e5, g5. I could start with rook e8. e5, g5. Knight h5. I hit the pawn. I feel like this could pay off or it could backfire. I might just start with rook e8. It's a more controlled move. I'm putting the ball back in white's court. You can always analyze after the game if this were a good option. Okay, so white trades. And knight g3. So, of course I could take... I don't really want to open the h-file for white. So I'm thinking like queen c7 or queen b8, creating the battery. Queen c7 could eventually run into knight b5. Although queen c7, knight b5 I take with check. Or I have queen a5. So this should be safe to play. Yeah, just lining up. I mean, e5 is still a move I'd really like to play at some point. The rook has x-ray vision against the king. It's just about calculating lines where I lose d5. Because, yeah, g5 kicks away my knight. I'm imagining knight to e2. And then maybe e5. I can also throw in taking first. There's also knight ce2. But with that move, then, there's less pressure against the d5 pawn. There's also king f2, which, I mean, loses casting rights, but might be justified here. Getting the king off the e-file and supporting the knight. So I'm really just trying to anticipate what white's going to do and then what my ideas will be. Like king f2, e5, g5. Thinking maybe I take counterattacking the knight. There's a line. Okay, never mind. Knight ce2 is played. Okay, so now let's imagine pawn e5. Pawn e5 takes, takes. I hit f3. Pawn e5, pawn g5. Knight h5. We trade, we trade. There's queen takes d5 in the end. I think it's still worth it, though, to open the center. It's one of these spots, like, I could burn a lot of time, but yeah, I think it's just, it's fine to rely on intuition. Like, my pieces are so well placed in the center. And, yeah, I don't mind the trade of knights. I could also, like, if takes, I could take back with a rook to defend the pawn if I don't want to sacrifice. Okay, so white takes on c5. So e-file is not really opening that soon. I think I should take back with queen. defending the pawn on d5. And it's equal material, but I mean, positionally, I have more center, more development, probably just a safer king as well. I think white is suffering from the fact they were slow to develop in the opening. Now, I really want to play pawn d4, but there's knight e4. So, yeah, probably knight b6 here. Simply defending. Get ready for rook a d8. a4, okay, so maybe trying to dislodge my knight. Resourceful move. Like rook a d8, a5. Do I have any tactics? Not quite seeing it. I could play a5 myself, but that walks into knight b5. Considering e4. e4, f4, though. I'm going to play a5. Just a preventive move. Really didn't want my knight to get kicked. If knight b5, I'll probably move the bishop, trying to stay solid, eventually optimize my rooks. Castling, okay. So we'll play rook a d8. Now if knight b5, I probably would drop back to b8. Yeah, the king is still a little bit shaky on g1. Aligned with the queen. And g-pawn is very extended. Queen d3. e4 is a consideration. Could also play g6 just to be solid. e4, queen d4. Yeah, I think I'll start with pawn g6. Just making sure white doesn't get in g6. Forming the pawn chain. I mean, e4 is definitely a move that's on my radar. Okay, let's drop back the bishop. It's turning into a blitz game. Probably have to up the tempo very soon. Okay, pawn b3. Okay, so now pawn e4. I also have rook c8. There's also queen e7. Starting with queen e7, simple attacking move. And there's an idea of pawn e4, queen d4. I have bishop e5 to skewer. So white prevents that. Also defends the pawn. I think I just want to take now. It's a good move, though. Take. There's queen c5. Pawn d4. Not quite sure what to do here. I'm gaining space. I'm not thrilled with this move. Makes my bishop a bit bad. But I think I want to transfer over and start targeting the pawn. White's been playing this well, like kind of consolidated. And yeah, this could get very messy. a5's hanging, but c2's also a target. Some idea queen c5 and pawn d3, which I can't quite go for. Hmm. Yeah, I think I'm losing the pawn. I didn't see what else to do there. My plan is probably to double up on the c file and target the somewhat backward c2 pawn. Yeah, we're both getting very low on time. Pawn c4. I could en passant. Looking for other options. Don't think I want to en passant though. I'm gonna play this move. Might be the wrong idea, but targeting this, if takes, it'll be bishop versus knight. I'd really like to shift the focus to the king side. There might be this idea to eventually target the pawn, prevent h4. Okay. Move back. Now the bishop is so bad on b8. It's the downside of these pawns on dark squares. So maybe I want to play bishop and bishop d6, allow the trade. I usually don't pre-move in the speed run, but these time scrambles, it does call for some pre-moving. And if white doesn't take, okay, take back. I was going to say bishop e7. Okay, I mean pawn d3. I'm going to play pawn d3, queen e3. Play this first, maybe support the pawn push. The opponent's played very well to like recover from the dubious opening. But I'm still feeling okay. Play pawn h4. Preventing white from playing h4. Now I have the idea king g7 and then eventually rook g5. Okay. I mean, white has two connected pass pawns, but the weak g5 pawn. Okay, let's take this. Rook g3. Huh. Take this. Okay, that's a free pawn. Everything should be under control now. Let's check. Okay, and that's checkmate. Oh, that was one of the most intense games so far this this episode. Opponent's offering a rematch, but maybe it's canceled the offer. Yeah, that's why you don't take a draw after the second move, but you play on and have a more interesting game. Yeah, what to make of this game? I mean, white was maybe fooling around a little bit in the opening, but yeah, it was kind of hard to punish. Like I've just tried to follow principles, and so here the engine actually really likes this move, knight takes g4. I found it a little bit difficult to judge from a distance. I was calculating king f1, and now it's saying, Ah, yeah, it's saying bishop takes d3 is best. Idea after it takes back, there's pawn f5. I'm down a piece, but yeah, maybe the f-file's opening. It's still kind of hard to assess. I didn't go for the sacrifice. Played bishop g6. And yeah, it felt still very comfortable. All of this felt fine. I'm curious if I missed anything obvious. a5 was fine. Put the rook in the center. And it was really just slightly preferable for Lac, but White was able to make use of the b5 square, completed development, and I think eventually I got into trouble. Like my a5 pawn was weak. It was very gradual that I kind of lost my advantage, and once White takes the pawn, it's probably a little bit better for White. But I did have some compensation with this very strong pawn on d4. Yeah, the engine is slightly preferring White. And then, I mean, for the last chunk of this game, we were both below a minute. I was happy with this idea h4 because it made life very easy. Like these situations where you're very low on time, it can be very helpful to look for kind of a multi-move sequence. In this case, it was king g7, rook h8, rook h5, queen e7. And I was able to execute that without having to think much about what else was going on, even though White was making progress on the queen side. Yeah, maybe f4 was a better try here. I was going to take. Oh, but then there's queen takes d4, king g8. Yeah, this is a mess because I'm going to win g5 and I'm losing f4. Engine says White's for choice. But once I won the g5 pawn, we traded. And then, yeah, especially once I won the c5 pawn, then I was able to breathe a small sigh of relief. I still had less than 20 seconds, but my opponent had a bit less time. So, yeah, very hard-fought game. Some fun games today. I think all of which were hard-fought. I think I'll end it here. So thanks everyone for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed the content. As always, if you want to subscribe, it does help the channel. Click the button below, and I'll see you guys soon.